Thank you all for coming in today. Jutta, thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here.
I'd love to just start at the beginning and maybe just have you give us some background on how you became interested in the blockchain and how you decided to build Parity.
Have I never told you about this?
Not the real story.
Interesting.
Just the one on the website.
So, I think it was a sequence of events that happened and then culminated in the Snowden revelations, I guess now 6 years ago, which led me to explore what we can do about changing the status quo and building a better internet, better institutions that give people agency back. And then in 2014, I came across the Ethereum project, but more specifically, Gav's vision for the decentral web, Web3. And that's what drew me to the space, like an alternative way of architecting applications.
How did you come across it?
I actually deleted my my search history, which is all my browsing history, so I can't really tell. I know I came across like some of the early work that Primavera Di Filippi had done at the time, and then Made Safe, and somehow some Reddit discussions when Reddit was still a place you wanted to be.
Just bouncing from one web page to another, you discovered it?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it then. From that point, you joined the Ethereum Foundation. What happened, or how did you join the Ethereum Foundation? Did you just call them and pick up the phone and say, "Here I am"?
Well, I don't think they had a phone at the time. No, I met Gav at the.
Wait, back up a second. You didn't have a telephone?
No, I did, but I don't think the Ethereum Foundation had one. I met Gav at the Bitcoin meetup in Berlin, and like over time the team in 2014, and well, I was looking for an interesting project where I could contribute. I have a background in math. When I left uni, I worked for a couple of years in management consulting, but really didn't feel that the work that I was doing had any impact. And Ethereum looked like a project where I could have impact, and also in some ways meant I could do what I liked about maths at uni. So you could solve problems using science, using technology. But an interesting twist to that, like from uni I knew like how to solve science problems with maths, like physics, biology, but now interestingly we could use technology to solve human coordination problems, and that's really what drew me to the space.
And from Ethereum, you left to build Parity. How'd you get to this vision?
I mean, what now seems like a very clear vision, I guess, was a development over time. I mean, initially we started out with building a new implementation of the Ethereum protocol, just clean slate, using what we've learned from building the C++ implementation, and then developed that over time, learned through projects like the work that we did with the World Food Program, and the different implementations we did of other protocols, Bitcoin and whatnot, and this all led to that framework and platform that we put together with Substrate and Polkadot in the end, or that we're building now, actually.
I remember the very, very early days of, I guess, what was called Eth Core. And the early discussions were a lot around building admin controls and scalability. What led to this interoperability vision?
Scalability was one of the things that became, like scalability was clearly a problem that everybody was aware of when Ethereum was launched. Like I remember that end of 2014, DEFCON 0, Gav was giving a talk about the sharding ideas, and then like I guess it's now an obvious step to then relax further and have heterogeneous chains or shards, as we have it now in Polkadot. So it's really a sequence of learnings and realizations over time that I guess now in hindsight look more obvious than they were.
Why do you think it's important for where we are as a world, for where you are as a company to build Polkadot?
Oh, I think for where we are as a world, like that goes back to all the things that are wrong about how the internet works right now, how businesses that use web technologies work, gathering data, always having in particular intermediary in between me and another party. But then from a technological perspective, I guess we've seen that we need more flexible tools, more modular tools. I think Sean gave a really good introduction to why it's super interesting to use Substrate as a developer now, because you get a modular extensible toolkit to launch your own blockchain and innovate, pull in and assimilate other technologies as they come about. I think that's really what we need right now, so we can all build a better system together.
Polkadot fundamentally depends on there being lots of different blockchains. Mm-hmm. Why are you so sure there's going to be a world with lots of different blockchains instead of one universal blockchain?
I guess it's just a matter of trade-offs. I mean, by design, transactions on a blockchain are costly, and so if you want to make it work, you do have to make trade-offs and customize to the particular use case, because a one-size-fits-all solution will just have too much overhead, and therefore you want different chains that can be optimized to different cases. I think in particular, the opportunity to have different models of governance on different chains and charts is quite interesting, because while for some application it's really useful to have a wide, completely open chain, like there's other things that require maybe some regulatory rules to be implemented, say the dealing, and where different parties also want to have the certainty that or be involved with the governance of that system, and that's where that becomes important.
I remember, excuse me, I remember roughly 20 years ago, there was a large group of people who believed that at the end of the development of the internet, 7 websites would exist, because the data showed that people use 7 websites every day. And I think they forgot to take into account the long tail of how we engage with reading, how we engage with music, and how we engage with technology. And it feels like the same is true here, that you've got, as you say, function-specific blockchains that would be oriented around governance or around finance. You might have developer-specific blockchains where certain developers feel like it's easier to code in one language versus another, and we end up with a lot of them.
Or you want to develop at a breakneck speed because you want to be fast and include tools that just come about. Yeah.
If you didn't build this and that happened, how limited would the world of blockchain be? So if Polkadot didn't exist and that vision came about, what would we be missing?
Well, I think in particular, like a great opportunity, as I say, like to build a better system together, because it has the flexibility and modularity, and through Polkadot, the interoperability between all these solutions. So really, even at this early stage, you benefit from the tools that other people build as part of the modules, and then directly through the shared security model, like you can immediately launch a chain in a minute, which would have like taken you just a couple of years ago. I doubt you'd be able to launch a chain within 6 months, like from scratch.
Do you have an example in your mind of a place where the interoperability really could make a difference in a business? Is there some use case where it's so obvious that if this could happen, it would make a big difference to the world?
I think like a system where you don't have interoperability just doesn't get very far. I mean, then you're stuck again with intermediaries that sit in between, and prey on your data. Like you don't want this. Like you don't want to make yourself dependent on anybody facilitating a transaction chain. I mean, I don't think that there's like one single application. Like for some, it will be more important than for others. But having the option and having that really built in from scratch seems to me like a very obvious and interesting proposition.
In Sean's presentation this morning, he showed the growth of code commits year over year for Substrate, which you just mentioned is building a blockchain in less than 6 months. Substrate didn't exist a year ago, so can you talk a little bit about what that means in terms of code commits year over year, why Substrate matters, and how it obviously it evolved out of something, and how it evolved?
I mean, the origin really is from us having built several blockchains and then realizing, well, it would be good to make this a toolkit, really, because we've done that too many times from scratch. And now it's really, I mean, the company has a strong origin with basically just being devs initially, and so all what we're building is for the developer community. Like we have strong roots in open source, and so building this toolkit is really what we also enjoy doing, to make it easy for people to bring their ideas to life and what they want to do.
Was it originally a Polkadot toolkit that then got spun out, or was it a separate vision?
Yeah, no, I mean, it has the origins in Polkadot. It was renamed, and then the Polkadot specific things are now separate.
And maybe you feel like you've answered it, but I'd love to dig in a little more. How does it relate to Polkadot?
Well, Polkadot and Substrate really go hand in hand. Like, if you want to, I mean, while you can also build a parachain in the future at some point, you can also build this independently, but you probably never want to build a parachain without using Substrate because it makes it so easy. But we also envision like lots of other chains that might not, for whatever reason, connect to Polkadot immediately because they want to do independent experiments, and it's really there to enable this.
Let's take a step back as to why people need to build their own blockchains as opposed to building on top of a universal blockchain. What are the principal reasons for that?
It really goes back to like dealing with the overhead that you get if you have a one-size-fits-all solution. Like, also, I mean, there's various reasons. Like, maybe you have certain requirements. Security is one, and so you need to have certain requirements for the smart contract language that you use, or you need high throughput because you serve a lot of payments or gaming as a different example that will need that. And you really want to be able to customize and
even privacy.
Privacy is another one. I mean, integrating zero-knowledge proofs, which is a costly computation on-chain. Like, if you want to do that, like you want to limit it to the bare minimum, what you need for your application to enable it. I mean, we've seen that Zcash got implemented as an independent chain, and it wasn't just people trying to directly, or like it didn't appear as a first thing on Ethereum, but it appeared as an independent thing because it was just too costly to do it on that one-size-fits-all solution.
We're early. We're still in the first inning of this, or maybe just coming up to bat. Is it too early to be building an interoperability protocol before there are protocols that have really deeply taken root?
I mean, Polkadot is not really just interoperability. If it was just interoperability, I think interoperability was like just as one specific thing was like really hyped 1 or 2 years ago. I mean, it's really an entire multi-chain framework that you get that lets you address various different issues. I think the interoperability is just super important from a network effects perspective, that you can compose with other applications that run on other chains, and that's where it's important. And what you what you miss if you just look at pure interoperability solutions that do not take into account, well, that there's issues around scalability that you can address when you share security in a pool like with Polkadot.
How many users have to be on Polkadot for the nth user to get a benefit from using it? Is it the second user, the 10th user? How many blockchains have to be on it?
Well, I mean, there's the end users, and then there's the developer users who build the chains, right? I mean, in the early version of Polkadot, we'll see probably 100 chains, and then later on, as the platform evolves, it will become hierarchical. So it's, I mean, there even with Polkadot initially there'll be limits to like how many different chains it can serve. So it's more a matter of that, like because of all the other things that you get with Polkadot and Substrate, like you do get enough to, even if you're the only chain you want to use it if you build a new system. You
get advantages for being the only chain on it.
Well, yeah, just because it's so easy and extensible and modular. So really, it's interesting early on because of what the technology gives you, and then later on, as more chains come along, it becomes more and more interesting.
And you obviously have competitors in this space. I won't ask you to name them because I know you well enough to know you won't name them. But can you talk about the differences between what Polkadot is building and the competitors?
I mean, a lot of talk was around the interoperability, and yeah, as I said, like various projects try to solve interoperability in isolation, and I do think you get much more if you think about it in a wider setting where you provide tools to address the other issues that blockchain still has at the moment. So,
what are the 2 or 3 biggest areas that you're solving problems for beyond the interoperability?
I think I'm most excited about to see how governance will play out. I think that adds a total new dimension now, like on-chain governance, to the game, like how things can evolve, what you can do. Like it's a really powerful thing that will help, as we hope, in particular to keep the innovation going, because you have a mechanism for upgrading, but then it gives you a lot more for coordination. And so seeing then developer funds, for example, also be managed through the on-chain governance would be super interesting.
Does the upgrading capability eliminate the likelihood of hard forks in the future?
Definitely. I mean, it makes it easy. It doesn't mean there can't be any hard fork. That's just the nature of the technology. But it will make it much easier to come to a constructive way of deciding on how the platform, how the protocol should evolve. Yes.
And does Substrate give the protocol a huge advantage over the competition, or is it really a discrete set of functionality in your eyes?
I think I mean, you want to make it really easy to develop on the platform, and that's what you get with it. So I think it's also a super interesting proposition, completely independent of Polkadot. And I'm like, based on the reasons like why I got into the space, like I'm really excited to see what that next wave of innovation will be that people develop on top of Substrate and Polkadot.
But I guess I hadn't expected that answer. It struck me that with Polkadot, with Substrate, where you can build a blockchain in minutes instead of, as you said, more than a year, that by default being integrated into Polkadot gives you a huge advantage, if for no other reason than I'm going to build a blockchain on the easiest way for me to build a blockchain, particularly if it's a proof of concept. And once you've learned a language and once you've spun something up, it's less likely to go somewhere else. Is it part of the strategy that just by promoting Substrate and already being deeply rooted into Polkadot by design, that thousands or tens of thousands of blockchains pop up and all of a sudden you have scale for interoperability?
I mean, certainly we hope that it gets adopted, yes.
Right. We haven't really talked about Parachains very much. Do you want to talk a little bit about the complexity of becoming a Parachain?
Yeah, I mean, Polkadot is a complex system, and so the way how you become a parachain, I mean, that's what also makes it very powerful, but in particular, the process of becoming a parachain, I guess, can add to the confusion. And one way that we are addressing this now is, Gav, I think, spoke yesterday about the concept of a parathread. So think of it as a pay-as-you-go for a parachain. So you don't have to put down commit capital for a long period and enter into this whole auction process, but you can just buy the resources you need to relay your transaction as you go.
So is this a new revenue source for the parachains out there?
I mean, in particular, it's a new feature that makes it easier for you to integrate what you've built into the Polkadot network.
Does this solve the limitation problem that there were only so many parachains and now effectively there can be
It is one of the ways. I mean, like, as with many complex systems, like there's not, to many of the problems, there isn't like a single solution. Like it's always various solutions that bring you like a big step ahead. And like one component of this will be the, once Polkadot is hierarchical, it will become cheaper to become a parachain at all. But until we're there, having that optionality of using a parathread when you need to transact is, I think, a really good proposition for those teams and projects that aren't sure or don't have dots yet, like how they could tie into the network.
I think one of the things that excites me so much about this project in particular is how every problem that you identify leads to another stream of business. I mean, Substrate, I actually think Polkadot started that way out of Eth Core, and Substrate seemed to fill that void, and now Parathreads seem to be solving some interesting problems that arose only after you built.
I think we mainly think of all of this as interesting technical challenge. I mean, you're an investor, so you think of it as business, but we think of it as interesting technical problems. So, and we love to solve them. I mean, that's really what we wanted to do when we started the company. Like,
I think of it as building things, just for the record. It's interesting though, because there's this cauldron of chaos that happens in any startup when you're building something, where you think you see everything and then you obviously can't, and then you see something and you can either duck or you can address it. And Polkadot's record has been really impressive on that front. And I think the launch of Kusama was super interesting to me. First of all, let me point out, for those of you in the back row who can't see it, Jutta's wearing white sneakers with white polka dots on them. Kusama is named after a Japanese artist, for those who don't know, who uses,
obviously not,
who uses polka dots or not, but there is an artist with that, and so there seems to be this embracing of chaos that takes place. And when Kusama was launched, I think Gavin, Chris will get into this later, talked about get ready for chaos. As a business person, how do you prepare, now that you've announced get ready for chaos, how do you prepare for the chaos? What are you doing organizationally to get ready to deal with it?
Well, it's implementing monitoring for the network, having response teams that can address issues as they arise. But really, it's part of the launch plan for Polkadot, and it's actually de-risking the Polkadot launch. So, I mean, we've learned our lessons with dealing with this technology, and like you wanna develop fast. At the same time, you don't want to take unnecessary risks, and launching Polkadot in an early version in that form seemed like the right thing to do, because you need a proving ground for the crypto economics, and that's what we are hoping to get from Kusama. So yeah, but at the same time, like, yeah, it might be that we'll see a lot of chaos, and we welcome that.
I think final question, and then maybe we could take one or two from the audience. What is not in Kusama at launch that's going to be in Polkadot at launch?
I mean, there's I think Gavin recently gave a bit of an overview, like how the features get unlocked over time. So immediately when Kusama launches, it will actually be a proof of authority network that then gets relaxed to a proof of stake network, and then the features get enabled through the governance over time. So in principle, a lot is in place of what we want to see later on. That's why we call it an early version of Polkadot.
Okay, I see we have a Slido question, which is, do you think Polkadot will consume ETH, like the ETH consuming BTC through...
Not to ETH consume BTC?
I can't read it.
I can't read it.
Does anyone in the audience have a question? Okay, great. Jutta, thank you very much. Really appreciate you
Thank you.
sitting down with us.